This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. The following Care Lab podcast does not provide health or medical advice. All content is provided for information purposes only. Listeners are encouraged to speak with their healthcare provider for specific healthcare advice and are wholly responsible for the outcome of implementing any tips or information presented.
Hey everyone, welcome to Care Lab.
Welcome to Care Lab. You already missed the whole conversation.
You did. Sorry. We had the best conversation that we were probably going to have today, and we did it before we were recording, so you're out of luck.
Mistakes.
Yeah. But you should hang around for sure for the episode. Because we do have this is going to be a good episode. I'm excited to do this. So what we were talking about before came up because I had the idea for this episode while I was on a run.
Which is when she has all her good ideas. And I hate running. So I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe I don't have good ideas either.
I think you have a lot of good ideas. When do you get your best ideas?
Oh man, I've had this question before and I don't know if I have a good answer. I think at this point in my life, I'm not going to say this is the truth all the time, but in this point in my life, times I have the best ideas are when which is few and far between.
That is not true.
There is solid level of like, I don't have to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are very few times where my brain is off or like no kid needs to be fed, no task needs to be done, no whatever. Like those moments of solitude, that's the word I was looking for, not solid. Those moments of solitude is when I have my best ideas because then my brain is never off. And so if I don't have to do a task, my brain's like, well, what other things can be awesome? And then I get new ideas.
So that's exactly what running is for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's this dedicated moment where my brain is not focused on anything. Like I'm just there in solitude by myself, not taking care of other people. And it gives, and like, just like in my body, and it gives my brain the freedom and the space to like imagine things or to work things out or to solve problems because I'm not focused on trying to get the next task done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like there in that moment. That's exactly what running does for me.
That makes total sense. But I was talking earlier about how I hate running and I only can run for a goal. And I played basketball in college. And so I've run lots, but it needs to be like a shorter distance. And but it could be for longer. It just needs to be a shorter distance. So I feel like I'm accomplishing something every time I go back and forth up the court. But when doing like a shooting workout, or even if it's by myself, like I don't have ideas then because I'm always thinking about like making the next shot or like it's still a task happening. But when you're running, I can understand how like you can pick your feet up and go one foot in front of the other without really thinking about it.
Yeah, especially if I'm sure there are people who are like very serious runners who run races and they are they're super focused on what they're doing, right? Yeah. Like they're running so fast and like really thinking about how they're going to make their pace and maintain things and where the rest of the runners are. And I'm not that runner. I am really slow. Like this is part of the trick. Actually, you can run really far if you go slow enough. It's not
for long enough.
And for long enough. That is the other side of it is sometimes, because again, I am very slow. So like, let's say I was training for a half marathon or something. It takes me forever to run that far. So there does come a point where I honestly get bored.
So you gotta think about something.
And I'm like ready to be done. But yeah, I mean, the trick is, at least for me, you can run really far if you just go slow enough. And it just gives, like, for me, it just gives my brain space. I come up with all my best and probably all my worst ideas running, but all my ideas.
You get plenty of ideas.
So many ideas. Brain is on fire with ideas all the time.
See, I don't think that's what the saying is. The saying is actually, if you run fast, run alone. If you run far, run together. So
Oh,
you need a team. It needs to be a team sport in my life. That's how things work for me.
I
Cross
hate
country?
running. I hate running with other people.
Really?
Yes, I do.
Because it takes away your peace in solitude, or it's like a comparison, and then it's like
It's like
trying to keep up with them.
one because I am genuinely like I'm really slow, and so I can't keep up with anyone. I really
Uh-huh.
can't. So then I'm just thinking about how like I can't keep up with people, or more than that, I'm feel bad because I feel like they're slowing down to match
To
my
run with
pace,
you.
and then I'm worried about the other person, and I'm not running so that I can worry about other people. Like it is 100% a selfish activity for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't like, my husband has always been like, why don't you want to run together? You'll never run with me. And I'm like, I don't, it's not you. It's everyone.
Not that I don't want to run with you. I don't want to run with anyone.
I
So
don't want to
don't
run.
feel slighted.
Yeah. That's like, I like to go do races with people. Like I have a cousin, we did a half marathon together last year, and I hope we get to do another one together this year. And she was like, are you okay not running together? And I was like, absolutely. But like, it's fun to do that event together because then you get to celebrate together at the finish line, and you have like, there's someone else who's training for it, who's like pushing you towards that goal.
Mm-hmm.
So it holds you accountable
I was about
for,
to say the accountability.
yeah, for like getting up and running 8 miles when you don't feel like actually getting up and running 8 miles or making that time to do it. So like that's really nice. But in terms of like side by side running, no, I don't want to talk. I don't want to worry about keeping up with your pace or you having to slow down to meet mine. Just like we can both go for a run at the same time, but this is a separate activity.
Got it.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
That's funny.
So
okay, we
yeah.
talked all this up.
Yes,
so you
we
better
did.
have an awesome idea about what we're talking about today. I'm all ears.
Okay. So I've got a two-parter here for you. The first is, so the first question will kind of lead into the second. So the first question is, how often or can you think of any like specific parts of conventional wisdom, right? Things that are like passed down kind of from generation to generation or are just sort of held to be truths, right? That are actually wrong, that drive you crazy.
Oh,
do you know what I'm talking about?
Okay, something that it's like old wives' tales or like things
Yeah.
that people
Yeah.
think all the time but are actually not true.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's a hard question. I don't know if I have any that come to mind. You tell me yours first, and then I'll come up with something.
Okay, well, so this I was reminded of this because we were talking about running. So something that really, I don't even want to say it drives me crazy, it makes me deeply concerned, is people believing that like wearing sweats and like plastic. I see people walk around in like garbage bags and sweatshirts in 100 degrees here in Texas, and they're like doing it to lose weight, right? And it's so dangerous. So like this belief that you can just like sweat out your weight, and one, that it's going to actually help you really genuinely lose weight in a meaningful way, or two, that it's good for you. And obviously, well, obviously not obviously. To me, it's obvious just because like of, you know, being in healthcare, it's so bad for you. I mean, like you could be really genuinely risking your life doing something like that in the right circumstances, because you're dehydrating your body and you're putting a ton of stress on all of your major organs, especially your heart. But then also like, it's just water. It's not fat. You're just losing fluid. You're not actually changing the composition of your body, except the fact that you're like damaging yourself.
Everything.
Yeah, everything. So don't do that. If you do that, please don't do that.
Yeah. I'm always like, why do people think that works?
Because it's conventional wisdom. It's like passed it, like, oh, you need to lose a few pounds, go sweat it off, right? It's just passed down. Hey there, it's Emilia. Listen, I am so thrilled to have a great resource like Ask Sammy as part of the Care Lab team, and here's why. It's a game changer for aging in place because it makes it so simple. All you do is ask. Just type in your question or even tell Sammy what the problem is and get tailored solutions. Everything from innovative adaptive equipment to comprehensive resources. It's a great way to become more empowered, to live more independently, and to live with greater confidence. And my favorite thing about how Ask Sammy works is it's deeply rooted in dignity and practicality. So, whether you're a fellow therapist, a care partner, or someone who's seeking solutions for themselves, visit www.asksammy.com. We're going to link it in the show notes so you can find it there. Start making home more accessible today. Now, back to the show.
I think I have two, actually.
Mm-hmm.
One is that if your body is cold, you're going to get a cold.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, it's cold outside, you got to put a coat on. Yes, I agree with that. But the reasoning or the proof point is not that you're going to catch a cold. Like, you catch a cold from germs, and you can get that whether you're warm or not. It just depends on if there's germs around that you put inside your body. And I'm like, that's what that relates to.
Yep.
And my other one is that multitasking is a thing.
Ooh.
Like, your brain is not capable of multitasking. And I was guilty of thinking I could beat the system, beat my own brain, I guess, and do that. And now the thing I say the most often at home is, how many things can mommy do at one time? One. Okay, well, I'm already doing this thing, so I can't do that thing for you. So can you hold on? Like, I'm very clearly going to do one task at a time, because otherwise I'm doing all the tasks poorly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good one. I feel every time I see the word multitasking, it like makes me cringe. It's a cringy word for me because it's just not true. It's attention switching, people, and it just makes you not perform super well. And I think we're all guilty of trying to do that. I mean, I try to do it all the time to terrible results. But so we should all follow your lead. How many tasks?
Can't do it one time.
Can I do it one time?
I am not saying I'm not a hypocrite. I'm just saying that I'm trying to pay more attention to it so that I won't be falling into that cycle where I think I can do more than one thing at a time, because I really can't. Your brain, like the science says, your brain cannot do this. So,
science, people. It's actually a real thing.
There is some truth here.
There is some truth here. Okay, so this leads me into like the bigger topic of discussion.
Okay, drumroll please.
Okay, so there are also lots of myths about aging in place, and some, like, I would say, like, conventional wisdom that might not be true that people often think of and follow when they're thinking about getting their homes up to age in place, or thinking about their parents or grandparents or whoever aging in place. So I wanted to dispel some of those myths today in this episode.
I think that sounds awesome.
All right.
You want me to give my first myth?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Okay, my first myth is that you need to be able to remodel your home in order to really be aging in place. I think when people hear aging in place, they think about a house, they think about construction, they think about money and bathrooms. And while that is definitely a component, and you could certainly go that route in order to make your home accessible, that is not the only way, nor is it the most frequent way that people make a plan to age in place. Because truthfully, most people, not everyone owns a home or lives in a place that they're going to remodel. And so aging in place really just means making sure that the space that you are at is going to work for your needs now and in the future. You can do that through adaptive equipment and lots of behavior change, resources, services, lots of ways.
Mm-hmm. I really like that too, because I think for so many people it feels like aging in place is out of reach when they're thinking about construction, because and heavy remodeling, because obviously that is expensive. Like, that's a big investment. And if you can do it and if it's worth it for you, then, you know, by all means you can go ahead and do those things if they're necessary, or if you were gonna do it anyway, then you want to be thoughtful about how you're doing those things, right? But I think it puts it way more in people's grasp by saying, like, hey, it doesn't have to be heavy remodeling. It doesn't have to be construction. Like, we can make some thoughtful adjustments
Yes.
and changes, and be well aware of the resources around us that can actually make this possible for a much wider spectrum of people, not just folks who can afford to, gut their house and remodel everything.
Yep. Exactly. What's your myth?
So I have there are a couple that really get under my skin, but one of them is, and it's related to fall prevention too. The idea that if you are going to age in place, or if you're afraid of falling, then you should like have really thick carpeting installed.
Oh, so that your fall is cushioned by the
That's right.
carpeting?
Yeah, so it's
I have
actually,
heard somebody say this.
oh, I hear it all the time. So it's actually not a fall prevention thought. And I think, and people aren't even thinking about it as fall prevention. They're just thinking, I'm gonna fall.
Uh-huh.
When I fall, I want to land on something soft.
Uh-huh.
And I get that, actually. That's not 100% wrong, because if you do fall, you will probably get less hurt if you're landing on something softer.
Uh-huh.
However, you're so much more likely to fall if you're on that thick carpeting.
Thick carpet. Yes.
And so like so the analogy that I will always make for folks is, let's say you're on the beach and you're walking on the beach, and the sand is different depending on where you're walking on the beach, right? If you're down by the water and the sand is pretty compact, then it's pretty easy to walk on, because it's nice and firm. It takes less energy. You aren't catching toes on things. Like, it's just an easier place to walk. Now, if you move up the beach and it's really soft and dry, well, that's a lot harder to walk on that sand, because it's soft and it's not a stable surface. And that's kind of an extreme example, but I think it helps people to understand the difference. And when let's say maybe you do have a mobility impairment, or you have a balance issue, that difference that seems really, really subtle when you are, when you don't have any of those problems, can be the same as the difference between hard and soft sand when you're in that situation. So it's just one of those things, like this idea that I'm going to fall anyway, let me just have really soft carpeting, is not necessarily the best strategy, because it is actually going to make you more likely to fall. And the more you're falling, the more likely you are to eventually have an injury. Like, that's just fact. You fall enough, you're going to get hurt. So I would rather people have the mindset, let's do things to prevent that fall from happening in the first place. One of them being making sure that the environment and the flooring is actually set up for my success to make it easier to walk. And then doing all of those other, like, all the other underlying work to help prevent falls as well, because it's more than just one solution for something like that. I will also add to that if you have thick carpeting, or sometimes even carpeting at all, and you end up needing a mobility device, like if you need to use a walker inside, if you end up using a wheelchair, sometimes it can even just like clearing that surface and getting it over, even with like a cane or something, can be harder. But if you have anything with wheels, it is not going to work well on that carpet. And it can end up being something that prevents you from moving independently at all at a certain point in your home. So that's one of my big ones.
So instead of like thinking about, oh, I'm going to add this for some protection, and so that I can stay living here, you're actually making it a lot harder for you to stay living there, because you risk falling. And then even if you do end up with like a mobility device, now it's even harder to navigate, or maybe impossible for you to get in that space. So you're really just stacking the deck against yourself.
Exactly. And then in that case, you're either stuck, like you can't move around your space because the flooring is not conducive to that, or then you do have to do some remodeling. And at that point in time, you are probably in much less of a position to actually undergo a project like that. So that's one of mine that I'm always like, no, let's not go down this path. Let's think a different way about this, because we can always do other things to prevent you from falling, but once this is here, it's just a risk factor that's going to stay, and it's not very flexible.
Yeah, literally. Okay, you want to know my second myth?
Yes.
That you should think about aging in place when you're older,
Mm.
or less mobile. So one of the very first ways that I was trying to get the word out about the services that we provide was to go to senior focused events. And the feedback that I got all the time at the booth is like, oh, that's nice for them. I don't need this yet.
Mm.
And while nobody ever wants to, for lack of better terms, address their mortality, even though that's the one thing we will all do. We are all born and we all die. Those are only two things we always have in common. You people just don't want to deal with it. And they associate, I think, not necessarily rightfully, the aging process with death. And where we don't think about like kids growing up as like the end of their life, although it does make them closer to it, right? Aging is just another, component, another it's just another time in your life, right? Nobody knows when their end of their life is coming. So why not make the years that you have the best ones you can? That's why you go to school. That's why you take care of your health. All those things are for like they're to make your life better. And aging in place to me is like a way to make your life better,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a thing that is like, oh man, the end is near, so I need to think about how to make sure I can hang on and live in this house. Like with the house that we bought 5 years ago, my husband loved it when he walked in, and I love it too when we lived there. But the first thing I noticed was that there was only one step to enter the house. And I was like, oh, if we never move again, we can live here, right? There's a bedroom on the first floor. I can already tell that an older lady lived there before. There's a grab bar and the bathroom on the first floor. And there's a shower on the first floor. I'm like, this house is awesome. And at the time I was like 35 when I moved to that house. And so to me, aging in place is a thing that you can think about at any moment in your life. And the earlier you think about it, the better. Care Lab listener, I have a question for you. If someone you love was going to hire a caregiver, what qualities would you want that caregiver to have? You probably want them to be reliable, trustworthy, kind maybe, just a generally dependable good person, right? Second question, would you also want them to be trained? I'm going to guess the answer is an emphatic yes. Okay, third and final question for you. Do you think it matters who provides that training? Like, is it cool if it's just anybody? Or would you want that person providing the training to be a qualified expert? Assuming you do, in fact, love this person that needs a caregiver, you probably want the expert, right? Well, that's what Higher Standards Caregiver Training does. Higher Standards Caregiver Training provides 100% occupational therapist-led training for caregivers. Caregivers get taught everything from gold standard foundational skills for transfers and activities of daily living, all the way up to how to deal with specific diseases, injuries, and illnesses. And most importantly, they are taught these things in a practical way that enhances the participation of the person being cared for, and it protects the safety of everybody involved. Why? Because everybody deserves a higher standard. Find a course for individuals or learn about training for care organizations at higherstandardscaregivertraining.com.
I couldn't agree with that more. And I had like a similar thing actually when we did some pretty substantial remodeling to our house several years ago. And in that process, and I was in my early 30s at the time. People thought I was crazy, but I'm like, I need to be able to live in this house if something happens. And of course, like that's informed by the fact that, especially at that time in my life, I was working with people who had things happen to them. People with spinal cord injuries, people with brain injuries, people who listen, folks,
Things
stuff
happen
happens.
all the time.
Stuff happens. And as much as I like wish that I were special and immune, or that my family is special and immune, we're not. And so I didn't want for a catastrophic like life event to end up turning into a catastrophic we have to move event. And so there were things that I had, even though like it's a 2-story house, but there were things that I had them make sure they put in the plans to make sure that in the event of something like that happening, we could make a few simple changes and we could stay in the house and it wouldn't, we could keep our lives going as smoothly as possible, which so that sort of brings me though, to my next myth,
Okay.
which is that in order, like, the main thing to think about in terms of aging in place is how many floors the house has. And everyone, I hear this a lot, like, well, I don't need to do anything, the house is fine because it's only one story.
Okay. Yeah.
I've been in plenty of single story houses that have plenty of accessibility problems that have to be addressed, right? On the
Yes.
other hand, you can have a 2-story house that's perfectly appropriate to age in place in if you have everything, if you have a plan to be able to access everything that you need, either on the first floor or with the ability to get up and down to that second floor, you know, in a variety of circumstances. So does it sometimes make things easier to have an all one-story house? Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. That can definitely make some things easier, but it's not like the most important thing about aging in place, and it's not the end all be all of aging in place, and it's not necessarily a prerequisite for aging in place. And of course, all of that just depends on the individual and the individual home, you know, and its structure and what your real goals are for aging in place. Like, we say that, but what does that mean? What does that mean you want your life to look like? And that's really where the more important questions kind of get answered, and where we can really, I think, to your point earlier, start making some recommendations and decisions that are going to be functional now and in the long term, and maybe won't require, you know, a crazy amount of heavy construction or none at all.
Exactly. Which actually leads into my next myth.
We didn't even plan this.
We
didn't even plan this.
This is how we be on the same wavelength. is that aging in place is only related to your environment and environmental changes. And because let's say you do have a perfectly accessible 1-story home, if you lose your ability to think well or remember, or lose the ability to use your hands well, that creates different challenges that are not necessarily related to how the house is situated. It's more about, do you have some levels of care that you've considered and you will enact when that thing happens? Do you have support in the community? Maybe it's your vision that goes right. Like, yes, environmental changes can make a difference for that, but what you really need is strategies to deal with things without your vision. Transportation, how are we going to get your groceries, what are we going to do for cooking, and like those things matter a lot too when you're considering age in place plan. I've had some people who lived in accessible homes but decided to move into assisted living because then they didn't have to cook, and that means they didn't have to get groceries, they didn't have to clean because somebody was coming to do that, and there was somebody around to hand them their medications. And so like those were the reasons that they moved, not because they couldn't stay living in that house because their body couldn't get from point A to point B.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, that so often we only think about, how's the bathroom? Can you get in there? Right? And the fact is, your life is more than being able to take a shower and use a toilet.
Yes.
Like, it's way, especially if we're talking about quality of life. Are those things important? Yes. Are they the only things that matter? Not at all. And so we have to be thinking again about this broader picture of what our day-to-day really looks like. And there are ways that you can solve pretty much every single one of the challenges that you were just naming, right? We can come up with ways to get meal prep done. We can come up with ways for laundry to get done, for groceries to be delivered. Like, we can problem solve all of that. At a certain point, it's just about, okay, is it really important that all of those things get done here in this place? Or what solution works best for you in the way that's going to be most expedient, that's going to be easiest, and then again that fits in with your vision of how you want to live. And there's not a right or wrong answer to that.
It's just a matter of thinking about it and like setting yourself up after you've thought about it and you're like, in an ideal world, I'd like to go path A. Then let's put the path A steps in place. Maybe let's learn how to order our groceries online before we really need to do it so we can feel more comfortable in doing it. Maybe there's lots of strategies and solutions, but the most important thing is like thinking about it and making a decision as to like what you think is most acceptable for your life, and then creating the structure around it. It's not any different than like life planning at different ages. So me and my husband lived in Washington, D.C., and we decided to move back to Kansas City for two big reasons. One was we didn't have $1 million to buy a house in DC, and we wanted to have a home. And two, all of our support system was here, and we wanted to have kids. And so could we have kids in DC and like build a support system? Yes, we could have. But it would have been harder and more challenging. And we had so much available to us here, and there's so many other intangibles. And so we just made a decision to set our life up in a certain way so we can live our life in a certain way. This is things that we all do as adults. This is adulting, right? And so it's not any different when you're thinking about how you might set yourself up in a time frame in which you might not be quite as, your body doesn't work the same way as it used to. Same thought process.
I think so. That leads me, I think, really nicely into my last sort of myth that I want to talk about here. And that's this idea that you're going to set something up and it's going to stay the same and you're going to stay the same. Or that how you think things are going to go are actually how it's going to go, right? I think it's so easy to get lulled into this trap of thinking that whoever you are right now is who you are going to be forever. And nothing could be further from the truth. I think that I'm probably a pretty different person now than I was 10 years ago. And in 10 years, another 10 years, I don't know who I will be. And I think that's probably true of everyone, right? We're not static systems. We're dynamic. We change all the time. And so thinking about aging place as something that you make a plan and you do it once is probably not realistic. Instead, thinking about it as something that is always part of your decision-making process, not like the thing that guides every single thing you do, right? It doesn't have to be that big, but just making it a part of your decision-making process. How will this work if something becomes less important to me? Is this going to be flexible? How can something change with me versus requiring me to try to stay the same to fit into its parameters? And so I think that, this idea that you plan to age in place once and then you're just done with it is kind of a big myth. It's really something that's an ongoing process. And why I always am such a big proponent for like flexible solutions that can change with you as your needs change as well.
Yeah, that's the huge thing about it. It's like thinking about what you want your life to look like, but then also thinking about which things can be put in place that can change with me as things change. I mean, we do this for kids all the time, right? This is why they sell like these convertible crib things, right? Where it starts out as a crib and it goes to a toddler bed and it goes to a regular bed. Because who wants to buy these 3 different things? Let's just do it in one thing, because we know a kid is going to grow up. Well, we know our bodies are going to change as we get older. So why not put things in place that can mold with us as we do those things? So yeah, that's a good point.
Dang, I think
problem solves.
Listen, folks, all the world's problems, we can just
care lab them.
We're just gonna care lab it. There you go.
Exactly.
No problem. Send it our way. All right. Well, that was pretty good. That was pretty good talk. I think we care labbed the heck out of it, though.
I agree. And if you agree, you should leave us a comment and let us know and tell us what you want us to care lab, because we're happy to problem solve. That's like the love and joy of an occupational therapist's life, is the problem solve. So let us do it for you. And then like and subscribe so that you can get the newest episode every Friday.
All right. We'll see you next time on Care Lab.
Bye.
Bye.
This is the Whole Care Network. helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.